My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 43 years old, and I learned on Thanksgiving that some people in your family will wait for a crowd before they show you exactly where you stand. We had packed the car the way we always did. Foil-covered dishes stacked in the back, kids arguing over the AUX cord, me convincing myself the 2-hour drive would be worth it this time. The house smelled like butter and would smoke when we pulled up. My mother had lit candles in the window. For about 10 minutes, I let myself believe we were just a normal family coming home for the holiday. Then I saw the pile. Wrapped boxes stacked in the corner of the living room, color-coordinated and tagged, way too deliberate to be casual. My son spotted them first. My daughter started counting. I should have read the room right there. Before we even sat down, my parents herded everyone into the living room and started handing out gifts. Except they weren't handing them to everyone. Every box, every bag, every ribbon-tied package went to my brother's kid. My children stood there watching, waiting, slowly realizing there was nothing with their names on it. And then my nephew, 13 years old and absolutely certain the world owed him an audience, looked straight at my kids and said, "Guess you guys didn't make the cut." My parents said nothing. My brother smiled at his shoes. My mother actually reached over and patted my nephew on the shoulder like he'd said something charming. I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not rage. Something colder than that. I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I walked over to my kids, told them we were leaving, helped them with their jackets, and got everyone to the car before the first course was even on the table. I thought walking out would be the hard part. I had no idea. Before I even get into what happened next, I want to know, where are you tuning in from right now? And is it colder where you are than it was in my chest that whole drive home? The kids crashed hard that night. My son went upstairs without asking for anything, which was how I knew he was gutted. That kid never turns down a snack. My daughter sat on the edge of her bed with her shoes still on. Not crying, just very still, which was somehow worse. My wife Sarah came and stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for years every time we drove home from that house. Patient. Tired. Already knowing what I needed to do. I picked up my phone and typed into the family group chat. Something short. Something I meant. I told them not to bother inviting us again. That we weren't their entertainment. That they'd be hearing from me. Hit send. Didn't soften it. Didn't explain it. My phone started going off inside 40 seconds. My mother called twice. My brother sent a paragraph. My father texted, and I quote, "You walked out before we even ate." Real mature. My mother's message said I had embarrassed the family in front of everyone. My brother wrote that his kid was just joking and I needed to lighten up. I turned the phone over, set it on the counter, and didn't touch it for the rest of the night. Sarah made tea without being asked and set a mug in front of me. She said, "You should have done this 2 years ago." I asked her if she thought I was wrong for waiting this long. She looked toward the staircase and said, "I think you did it before the kids started thinking this was just how families work." I kept hearing that the rest of the night. The next morning I had 17 unread messages and 1 notification from my son's school about a fundraiser. I made eggs. I didn't look at the messages until after the kids were fed. When I finally read through them, the pattern was exactly what I expected. Nobody apologizing, everyone explaining. Not a single person asked how my kids were doing. Not one text said maybe we took it too far. They were annoyed that I left. That was the whole concern. I blocked the notifications and started the day. About 2 weeks later, just as December hit and the neighborhood started putting up lights, my mother started a new group chat. She called it Holiday Plans, which should have been my first warning. The message was breezy and warm in that specific way she gets when she's already decided what's happening and is framing it as a suggestion. She'd found a rental house up north, sleeps 12, fireplace, the whole thing, and she thought it would be good for the family to reconnect before the new year. Then she mentioned, casually, one line like it was nothing, that since Daniel's always been more financially comfortable, maybe he could pitch in for Marcus and Jen's share so they could make it work. Marcus, my brother, who hadn't said a single word to my children after what happened. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time to make sure I hadn't added anything in my head. Sarah walked in and I handed her the phone. She read it, handed it back and said, "They genuinely don't think they did anything wrong." My brother responded in the chat within minutes saying it was a great idea and that Tyler deserved a good Christmas after the year he'd had. My father dropped a thumbs up. My mother added a little red heart. Nobody mentioned Thanksgiving. Nobody mentioned two kids standing in a living room waiting for a box with their name on it. I left the chat without saying a word. My mother texted me privately almost immediately. "That was rude, Daniel. This is your family." I stared at the word rude for a long time. Then I typed back one word. "No," she called. I didn't pick up. The voicemails started. Then the texts. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. She said my kids needed to develop thicker skin. She said my brother felt terrible, which was news to me since he hadn't said a single word in my direction. Then she went for the familiar one, the thing she always kept loaded for moments like this. She reminded me about the time they lent us money when Sarah was out of work. That was 4 years ago. 3 months. A rough stretch after a layoff that nobody saw coming. They had given us money for groceries twice, and we paid it back in full. Both times. But in my family, that kind of thing never gets paid back in my parents' minds. It just gets stored. Kept in a drawer and pulled out whenever they need to remind you that you owe them something you can't quite name. I didn't respond. I went and helped my son with his science project instead. My daughter was at the kitchen table sketching something in her notebook. She looked up at me when I sat down and gave me this small smile that had nothing to do with what was happening on my phone. And I thought, this is what I am actually responsible for. That night I blocked all 3 of them. Just to breathe. Just to get through Christmas without the noise. But blocking people and being free of them are 2 very different things. And I was about to learn that the hard way. January was quiet in the way that feels fine on the surface and strange underneath. The kids adjusted faster than I expected, which was its own kind of ache. My son got deep into a robotics club at school and came home every afternoon talking about gear ratios and sensors. My daughter started a comic strip in her sketchbook. Started drawing little characters who went on adventures and solved problems without anyone yelling at them. I noticed that. I didn't say anything. Sarah got a lead role on a project at work and was busy in the focused, energized way that makes a house feel stable. I started doing more of the cooking. I'd always been the one who made the holiday stuff, the real scratch recipes, the things that took 3 days and made the whole house smell like my grandmother's kitchen. It was something I'd been doing quietly for years. One evening in late January, my son drifted into the kitchen while I was testing a new brown butter cookie and said, "Dad, these are actually kind of crazy. You should sell these." I laughed. I said something like, "Yeah, maybe," but the idea sat there. 2 weeks later, I had a simple website, some craft paper boxes, and a list of about 6 things I could make well enough to charge money for. I called it Fieldstone Kitchen because I wanted it to feel solid. Rooted. Like something built to last. Sarah designed the logo. My daughter named the holiday tin after her favorite character from her sketchbook. My son helped me build out the order form. My first 10 customers were all people I already knew. Then one of them shared the page. Then someone ordered for an office party. Then a neighbor told her church group. It started to feel like something real. A few months in, my son placed in a regional robotics competition. 3rd out of 42 teams. I posted a photo of him holding the ribbon, grinning that gap-toothed grin, and wrote something simple about how proud I was. I didn't think twice about it. I didn't tag anyone. About an hour later, my mother commented on the post. She didn't write anything about my son. She wrote that Tyler had just been named to an elite travel baseball roster, and that the family couldn't be more thrilled. My brother replied underneath with a row of trophy emojis. My son saw it before I had a chance to take it down. He was logged into my account on the tablet to look at order confirmations for the bakery. He brought the tablet to me with this very careful expression, the kind kids get when they're deciding whether to be hurt or pretend they're not. He said, "Why did Grandma comment about Tyler on my post? There is no good answer to that question. There is no version of the truth that doesn't require you to explain to a kid that some adults in his life are committed to making him feel like a footnote." I closed the tablet. I pulled him in. I said, "That has nothing to do with you and everything to do with her." He nodded. Then he went back to the kitchen and finished his snack like he was storing the hurt somewhere and deciding not to open it. That night, I took my mother and brother off every platform I had. Quietly. No post about it. No explanation. They were just gone. My mother found out within 2 days and emailed me. Subject line, really. The body of the email was 3 paragraphs about how I was being childish and isolating the children from people who loved them. She said I was teaching my kids to run from conflict instead of facing it. I sat with that one for a while, because she had enough technique to make it sound almost reasonable if you didn't know her. Then I read the part where she said maybe if my son focused on more competitive activities instead of hobby robotics, he'd have more to celebrate. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I wrote back 8 words. Do not reach out to the kids directly again. Her response came in under 3 minutes. She said I was using my children as weapons. She said the whole family could see what I was doing. She called once after that. I let it go to voicemail, listened to it once, and deleted it. What she said in that message, I'll get to it because it was the thing that made everything that followed feel not just justified but inevitable. She said that if I was going to be this way, I should know that the family had always been more patient with me than I deserved. That I had never been as easy as Marcus. That the whole history of my parents helping me would look different if anyone ever really examined it. That line was not a warning. It was a preview. The letter arrived in February. My parents' return address was printed on the envelope in that formal way they do things when they want to feel official. 3 pages, handwritten by my father, which told me he thought he was being serious and measured. He talked about family legacy. He talked about grace and patience. He talked about how I had repaid years of support with hostility. Then he mentioned, almost as an aside, that any informal financial arrangement between me and my parents should be considered resolved and closed, given the current circumstances. Resolved and closed. As if something had been running. As if there was a tab I'd been benefiting from. Sarah read it at the kitchen table after the kids were in bed. She set it down and said, "They're trying to reframe the story before you do." She was right, because I knew something they seemed to have forgotten. In 2019, when my father retired earlier than planned and they got caught on a mortgage they couldn't float, they didn't call Marcus. They called me, and I had sent them $18,000 from money Sarah and I had saved over 3 years. My father had written me an email afterward. I still had it. He said he was ashamed to ask. He said they would pay it back once a piece of property cleared probate. He said he didn't know what they'd have done without me. I found that email in about 4 minutes. I forwarded it to a family law attorney named Greg Okafor, who came recommended by a guy I know from my son's robotics club. Greg was calm, methodical, and completely unbothered by the emotional backdrop. He read the letter, read the email, and said, "They moved first. Let's move second." We started putting together a small claims filing for the repayment plus interest. While I was going through old messages to pull together documentation, I found something I had completely forgotten about. About 9 months before everything blew up, my brother Marcus had texted me asking if I'd share some of my baking recipes, because his wife Jen wanted to try selling at a local market. I had done more than send recipes. I had sent them a full document, recipes formatted for production, cost breakdowns, packaging notes, and a rough brand outline I'd been sketching out for a potential expansion of my own operation. I had done it because that's what I did. I helped. I assumed it was safe. It was not. One of my bakery regulars messaged me in early December asking if I had a brother, because she'd seen an online shop selling what looked exactly like my brown butter holiday cookies, described with language that sounded like something she'd read on my site. I clicked the link. My brother and his wife had a full shop running Etsy, Instagram, a TikTok account. The product photos used a color palette that matched my original brand doc almost exactly. The item descriptions were restructured versions of my own writing. The signature cookie, the one my son had told me I should sell, was listed under a slightly different name with a story about a generations-old family recipe. A family recipe. Mine. Sarah looked over my shoulder as I scrolled through it and just said, "Oh, Marcus." Not surprised. Just tired. Greg said the recipes themselves were tricky to pursue, but the written descriptions, the branded language, and the visual identity elements were different. especially given that I had timestamp documents and a direct message chain showing Marcus asking for and receiving the materials. He sent a cease and desist to Marcus and infringement notices to both platforms. He told me not to contact Marcus personally. The platforms acted faster than I expected. Listings started coming down within days. Marcus texted me from a number I hadn't blocked yet. He said I was destroying his wife's small business over nothing. He said families share things. He said I was being vindictive because my own life hadn't gone the way I'd planned. Greg responded on my behalf. When the platforms requested documentation, Marcus and Jen didn't have any, because the originals belonged to me. My parents called it an attack. My mother left a voicemail saying I was trying to ruin my own brother over cookies. My father emailed Greg directly, which Greg described as unproductive. The shop went on partial hold. More listings came down. Eventually, Marcus agreed to a settlement. Written. Formal. He had to pull the copied branding, remove the duplicate descriptions, and acknowledge in writing that the original product concepts and marketing materials had come from me. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined. It was quieter than that and more final. The small claims case went to hearing the following month. My parents showed up dressed like they were going to a church committee meeting. My father gave a version of events in which the $18,000 had been a mutual family contribution rather than a loan, right up until Greg handed the judge the email. The one where my father said he was ashamed to ask. The one where he said they'd pay me back. The one where he wrote that they didn't know what they would have done without me. The judge was not moved by context. We won. Full amount plus interest plus filing costs. I didn't feel like celebrating. I felt like I'd finally gotten a bill corrected after arguing about it for years. Accurate. That was the word. Felt accurate. A few weeks later, a regional lifestyle publication reached out. Somebody in a comment thread about independent food businesses had mentioned my situation, the bakery, the copied branding, the legal dispute, and a writer was interested in the story about protecting your creative work when family is involved. I talked to her on the condition that my kids stayed out of it. She honored that. The piece ran under a headline about a Midwest dad who built a home baking business and had to defend it from the people closest to him. It mentioned the loan repayment as context. It focused on what it means to finally hold a line after years of not holding one. It was shared more than I expected. Podcast reached out. Then a local morning segment. I talked about the business, about what it costs to keep making yourself available to people who treat your generosity as a resource they're entitled to. Orders doubled, then tripled for the holidays. Marcus and Jen's shop never really came back. My mother left one last voicemail telling me I had brought shame on the whole family. I listened to it while I was packaging an order of shortbread tins and then deleted it because shame is the word people use when they want you to feel responsible for the consequences of their own behavior. The kids know the outline of what happened. Enough to understand that some adults chose badly and that our family handled it. My son, a couple months after the hearing, introduced me to one of his robotics teammates by saying, "This is my dad. He makes the best cookies in the county and he wins in court." I had to pretend I was looking for something in the cabinet. My daughter still helps with the bakery on weekends. She designed a new seasonal label last spring, clean and warm, with this little illustration of a house with light in the windows. She said she wanted it to look like somewhere you actually want to be. That detail mattered more than she probably knew. Sarah got a promotion and still does the dishes after I bake, which is the truest measure of a partnership I've ever found. The house feels different now. Not perfect. Not without the occasional hard day. But ours in a way it didn't used to be, because we're not spending energy managing other people's need to feel superior. The thing that actually changed everything wasn't the legal win. It wasn't the article or the orders or any of it. It was the moment I stopped explaining away what was happening to my kids and called it what it was. Some families use love as a leash. Some people in your life will stay close only as long as you agree to be smaller than them. Choosing your children over that system isn't drama. It isn't a grudge. It's just the most basic thing a parent can do. I used to think being the steady one, the reliable one, the one who always showed up and never made waves, was a virtue. Now I think it was a habit I'd mistaken for character. Real steadiness isn't absorbing everything without complaint. It's knowing when to stop. My parents went quiet eventually. Marcus didn't reach back out. The silence was strange at first, the way any long-standing noise is when it finally stops. Then it just became the sound of a house that belongs to the people living in it. If any part of the story lives in your own chest somewhere, I'd want to know. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you've ever had to decide that the family you were born into wasn't the one you were going to raise your kids inside of. And if you've built something better from scratch, I'd really like to hear about that too.